Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing a non-spoiler review for Blood Over Brighthaven. This is the same author that wrote Sword of Kaigen, which I'm sure if you even somewhat frequently watch Fantasy Booktube, you've likely heard of that title, as it very much launched itself into not only being a lot of people's favorites, but it is very much a booktube darling. A lot of people put it in their best fantasy standalones of all time. I think it deserves all of that love. I absolutely agree with a lot of the praise that Sword of Kaigen gets. I think Blood Over Brighthaven is better. If you're a fan of Sword of Kaigen, I don't know that you even need to watch the rest of this review, because I think part of what made that work so special is present within this as well, except for the author, I think, has really honed in on what makes them exceptional. I think that they're very polished with this one. The pacing is phenomenal. It is so pointed and direct, and once again, we don't hold back. They really punch you in the gut so many times within this, and it created for me what might be my favorite fantasy standalone of all time. I do want to note that there will be criticisms in this, but for me they weren't so much criticisms in my opinion, but I can see them being criticisms certainly for other people, so I promise it's not just gonna be a gush fest the entire time. But I also will add that the comp titles that I would personally give this, and that I have seen within how this was marketed, are basically the perfect recipe for my tastes. And perhaps if you have some overlap with the things I like, then that also might be an indication to you that you are probably going to enjoy this work regardless of what I say moving throughout the rest of this as we get into more specific details. But the other titles that I would compare this to, in the marketing, I saw a lot of people say the world reminds them of Full Metal Alchemist. So that's already one that I was like, check, sign me up. Then, as I was reading, there are aspects to the world building that reminded me in some ways of Arcane. Then the thing that I actually felt this was the most, if you were to do a like this, try that for one adult fantasy to the other, the thing that this reminded me of the most was actually Babel by R.F. Kuang. I know that a lot of people really love that work, so I think it perhaps will seem a little shocking for me to say I think Blood Over Brighthaven, in my opinion, did the themes better. My criticisms for Babel, and I promise if you haven't read these works, we'll get into specifics as to what the comparisons are, but my criticisms of Babel primarily came down to the fact that it was somewhat limited in its view, and within Blood Over Brighthaven, you primarily have one perspective, but you do have another from time to time, and that additional perspective is, I think, what creates this much broader view of this very significant issue that presents itself within the story. And then within Babel, you are mostly sticking to one individual who actually plays a similar role within the story and their world and their position within it as the character in Blood Over Brighthaven, except for when they start making certain decisions, I just kept thinking, I wish we had another person present so that we could understand how they feel about the events and how they're transpiring, and then the weight of all the consequences that our character is putting onto other people, we can see what that looks like from everyone else. And I think Blood Over Brighthaven did that, and I think it did it exceptionally. So getting into some more specifics, what is this book about and how does it relate to all of those comp titles? Blood Over Brighthaven follows a young woman who, depending on how you say it, you can say her name as Sayana or Skyana, however you want to say it. I'm going to say Sayana. And this character is somebody who is within a society that is not even a little bit hiding the fact that they think less of women. And it's very reminiscent of a time period where in our own history, there was thoughts that, well, women can't possibly do all the things that men do because their brains are so small. It's kind of that sort of society where they don't value what women can offer in any area except what they've already determined is what that gender is able to do. You actually see conversations about lobotomizing women when they experience too many emotions or when they're too overwhelmed by things. Stuff that is present within our own history, and I think that you can very much see how it mirrors that time, and that's the kind of thing that Sayana is up against. She has a brilliant mind, she is very capable with their magic system, and as a result, she wants to pursue a career where she can expand on her skill, that she can become the first within their magic system. They have different roles within it, and she wants to be this high mage type of character who will have great influence on the city, both in how it is protected from danger, which we'll get into in a second, but also somewhat her ambitions are somewhat selfishly motivated, because while she'll tell people, well, I'm doing this for all the women that come after, you can see very clearly, and I think she kind of admits to herself a little bit, I also want the glory. So she is a very complex character, and one that you find yourself simultaneously rooting for and questioning also at the same time. You question her, and then a little bit you question yourself for rooting for her, because you can see the villainy present within her. Something I loved about my reading experience with this is there were a number of times throughout the beginning that I questioned, is she actually going to descend into villainy as the story progresses? But I think more interestingly, there was also the question of, is she already the villain? But you see her have to overcome adversity, which I think that how that was woven into the story very much made you want to root for her, just from that instinct that is present in so many of us of wanting the underdog to show everybody and show society and prove it to everyone, look what I can do, look how capable I am. And when they have those extra things they have to push up against, you just want them to succeed all the more. And that's true of herself. She feels all those things about herself. She knows how smart she is. And as a result, that invites you into learning about the magic system in a way that's very, very organic. And I especially loved the magic system in this. I thought it was so cool. It was complex enough where it still felt like magic, but the way that they talk about it and the way they approach it also had this science feeling to it. And I think that's something a lot of us really crave these days. When we talk about a magic system, we talk about rules and limitations. This isn't anything new, but I think for a lot of us, we don't want it to feel like the magic is capable of truly anything, because what can happen is there will be various scenes where nothing that's been established in the past will suddenly be an option, and it's usually used as a form of deus ex machina. It gets us out of a situation, and that can be just plot armor in a lot of ways. The book never felt that way, but it did have this feeling all the time of, we just need to discover more. We just need to understand what it can do, and if we can understand it better, then we can create more things. We can make life easier for a lot of people. This is where I wanted to draw in the comparisons to Arcane. If you haven't seen Arcane, there are elements to it that are very much about the division within a society that is pretty much the undercity and the upper city. There are the lower class and the upper class individuals. And as such, you see that the upper class benefits from all of the technological advancements that you have within it. And the technological advancements are very much rooted in scientific discoveries that are tied to magic. So it once again has that blend of things feeling like magic and science. There are two characters specifically that are doing what they can to have a lot of developments that they truly wish for the benefit of others, especially those that are living in the undercity, and they view all the work they're doing as an opportunity to make life more equal. But of course, inevitably, there are people with power and there are people with a lot of political sway who use the technology to essentially just continuously benefit themselves, to make more money for themselves, and to have those that they have connections with also benefit. And it's just this vicious cycle of the rich get richer, and nothing is ever done to really improve the lives of those in the Undercity. You see that very much within Blood over Brighthaven. Our main character has this idea that within their world, this particular city, this is why it's a haven, because the rest of the world, or at least outside of this city, there is something known as the Blight, which can strike at any time, and the idea is that something ends up destroying people, plants, wildlife, and you don't know when it's going to strike, you don't know how to prevent it, you don't know how to escape it. You just have to hope it doesn't affect you. And the haven, the city that our main character lives within, has this magical barrier that protects it from the Blight. There is a character that shows up from time to time. They are actually who you follow in the opening, and it's a fantastic, gripping opening. You have a sense of, it's action-packed, but you already feel emotional investment, and you don't know what's going on, but it's also terrifying, and you have just enough that it snatches your attention fantastically, so great opening. But that character has a perspective here and there throughout the story. You recognize that they were just desperate to get within this city, not just because of the literal effects of the Blight and how it can affect you, But as a result of the fact that it can affect anything, including animals and plants, you also face the risk of starvation. So everybody is trying to do what they can to get to this haven so that they can live a life of safety. However, as you might expect, anybody that comes into the city is somebody who is now almost treated like they owe the city everything, and they should be grateful for any little scraps that they get. They should be grateful for the fact that they are even allowed within this city, and that they should do anything they can to improve the city overall. You do, as a result, see that the individuals who come from the outside are treated not only differently, but far worse than the people who were born within it. Our main character, as we've already discussed, is somebody who faces a tremendous amount of sexism throughout the story. However, you can see pretty quickly that she is somebody who, despite having to face those obstacles, she does have a relatively comfortable life in comparison, and she also is very naive to the experiences of other people because she runs in circles that are mostly upper class, we'll say. And I really loved the juxtaposition between these two characters, how they come together, how they get to know each other, and how they start to somewhat see each other, work together, and at times really despise each other. I loved their dynamic. I think it was one of the hardest things to read at the same time because some of the interactions between them are exceptionally ugly, are atrocious. The behavior is essentially inexcusable. And I really appreciated that the author included those things. There wasn't a sugarcoating. There wasn't an attempt to make our main character absolutely perfect. Sayana is a product of her society. And in the same way that I was describing how it feels as though she's having to face things that if we were to make a one-to-one comparison, you know, you might have a certain time period where you're like, this is somewhat reminiscent of what we're seeing within Blood Over Brighthaven. At the same time, I think something a lot of us have experienced before is that you see a certain figure in history and you see the way that they fought for some kind of cause that you're like, wow, they were a hero for their time. And then you see how they felt about other things, or you see their actions or statements about certain groups of people or how certain things should run. And you're like, I guess they're not the hero I thought they were. As a result of that being a fact of history, I felt like for the author to include those ugly moments for Sayana really made her feel like a real character. And then, as I said, you don't know. Is she going to descend into villainy? Is she going to end up being against? The other character's name is Tommel. Is she going to be against him, or are they going to work together for the greater good? And I loved that I questioned initially. And I hate to say I loved that she was so terrible, because if you've read it, you know that she is truly, truly terrible. But for the sake of the story and the realism that it was presenting, I think it did an exceptional job of not making her perfect. It made her flawed in many ways. And I found that sometimes, even though I initially rooted for her, sometimes I think I even said this early on, I almost felt bad then for ever rooting for her at all because of how heartless she can be and how much she falls back on certain things that she's been told. And you want to shake this character because you can't help but, as the reader, see the irony. There are so many people that have so many horrible views about you, these preconceived notions that they never challenge. And even when you are presenting them with your literal self as being different from what they've ever been told and taught about you, they still fall back on these things, because to have their worldview challenged in this one way means that things are going to start to unravel and they'll have to challenge other things. And yet you fall back on that same exact behavior toward other groups of people, even though you should know better. And it's that realism that I really, really appreciated about this. I don't think by any means, because I was making those comparisons to Arcane, that this is necessarily the same kind of magic system per se, or that everything about it is similar. I think it's truly in that one area that there are some similarities. As far as how it is similar to Fullmetal Alchemist, I would just say more so in how the setting itself within the city feels, where there is this level of, you have trains, and that's not the only thing. That feels pretty basic as a tie to Fullmetal Alchemist, but there are certain ways that the technology plays a role, and how even the city is described and the layout of it feels similar. I also think some of the components of Fullmetal Alchemist's magic system feel similar to some of the magic within this. And additionally, I personally found that some of the ways that you have individuals that you want to trust, but then you're wondering, is there a level of corruption involved? That's very present within Full Metal Alchemist. However, the main themes that I think are the most one-to-one across the comp titles would be this to Babel. In Babel, you are seeing a character who is going to an academic setting. Specifically in that one, it's a revised version of Oxford. And our character is somebody who has expertise in multiple languages, which ties specifically to their magic system. And they are somebody who also, similar to Sayana, faces obstacles. And they specifically face obstacles as a result of their race. And so you, once again, you're rooting for them because you recognize the way that has nothing to do with what they're capable of, and the fact that people just fall back on these things, all of the things we've already described within Blood Over Brighthaven. So you see the character having to fight back against that, and they keep wanting to prove themselves, but the further in they get, the more they discover that the magic that they are partaking in, and the luxury that they're starting to have, the more that they push forward, they're starting to realize that that comes at the cost of someone else's well-being, sometimes entire civilizations and their well-being. And then they're faced with this question of, do I keep going or do I fight back? And I love stories that explore those themes, which even though I had specific criticisms about Babel, I will always say that I want more books to explore those really heavy, difficult themes. And Blood Over Brighthaven does that. I can't say how, I can't give the specifics, because that's part of the discovery and sort of twists and turns throughout the book that made you very much feel on the edge of your seat. But Sayana has some things that she has to face, and it is very much within those decisions that you start to see if she is indeed going to become either just a version of who she already is, if she's going to lean into hero or if she's going to lean into villain. There's one aspect of the book I haven't really touched on yet that I actually think her other previous work, Sword of Kaigen, is where you're going to see the best parallel. Something that is done exceptionally in that other work is propaganda, and how so much of what you've been taught feeds into how you view the world, how you think of others, how closed off you can be, and how hard it is to resist. Within that story, you are exploring those themes through unlikely protagonists, one of whom is a young boy that you meet at the beginning of the story, as well as his mother. And I think his mother's perspective is where you grapple the most with how difficult it is when you have a child, because you want to do everything you can to protect them and to resist, even though internally you recognize the flaws of the system, you see through it. You have this constant struggle of you have to teach your children what the propaganda is teaching you to keep them safe, but you also don't want to have to do that because you don't want to continue to raise individuals who are going to perpetuate the propaganda that you've been taught. You want people to break free, and when you see this little crack start to form in your child where they're starting to view the world differently, you are both incredibly fearful and also proud. So Sword of Kaigen is great. Highly recommend. It's great. But I think Blood Over Brighthaven, you have a much uglier main character. And so in some ways, I think it embraces some of that dark academia setting, because I think a lot of dark academia has these characters that you really aren't sure if you like that much. And I kind of do appreciate the morally gray character that feels like a well-developed morally gray character. It's an earned label for them. But I think that propaganda, or at the very least, a society where in Blood Over Brighthaven it's more so rooted to their religion, and their religion is directly in relation to their magic system, and thus there is this feeling of like, well, things must be real, and things must be as our religious texts have said, because look at all of the wealth we have, and look at how we've been kept safe from the blight, unlike all these other people, thus it has to be true. So you're seeing this marrying of science and religion, specifically science and magic with religion, and that's a very difficult thing for a character to ever disentangle when it seems as though everything in front of them is directly related to and proven by what the religious texts have said. So there is this sense of it's kind of like propaganda, but I feel like it's much deeper than that, and it's not necessarily just somebody up on high has been bestowing this knowledge, but actually these lies onto their society to keep them all contained. Instead, it's more sinister in a sense, and it's more present within everyone, not just certain groups. And where in Sword of Kaigen there is this somewhat awareness of how things actually maybe are, but there's this fear of resistance. In this one, there truly doesn't feel like there's any way to escape it. And you have to ask, is there? Is there even a chance? Because the stakes are so tremendous. And I always love in stories when it feels like you have a situation where there's absolutely no way and the odds are stacked against you that you're ever actually going to create change. And this is so fantastically tied to the character, because I started talking about her by talking about the fact that she does insist that she wants change, but she kind of wants change selfishly so she can stand out. She can be in all the history books. But then when she actually truly is faced with what it takes to change the world for what would be the better, then there's this question of, in a way, I might be remembered, but maybe not in the way I want, or there's a chance I won't be remembered at all, because if I am not approved of by the people that are in power, then they could very easily bury me. So then there's this question of, do I even want to pursue that? Because I want to be remembered, but also I want change, and I want to be the person who has that first step towards change, because that's kind of what I've always built myself upon, of being that trendsetter, to put it somewhat in a basic way. But everything is so well tied together. The characters feel very real. I don't want to say too much about the side character Pommel currently, because I feel like some of the most fantastically done ways that the author captures what it is to be within a society that sees you as lesser. I think there are some really heartbreaking moments, but he is an amazing character, and he, I think, is quietly very heroic. He actually reminds me in some ways of the mother character from Sword of Kaigen, as he also has somebody that he is trying to keep safe, and he isn't quite sure how to go about that when he wants to root for them to have that rebellious streak within them, but that could mean putting them in danger. This book is amazing. Absolutely fantastic. I loved basically every moment of it. I loved the exploration of the magic, the exploration of the themes. I thought the characters were great. I thought it was exceptional. Where I think some of people's maybe dislike of the book might come from, or maybe where they won't resonate quite with it the same way I did, is that I already mentioned the fact that they very blatantly talk about women as less than. And this is true of how they talk about lots of people within their society. There's also various passages before the beginnings of chapters where you see sometimes it's religious doctrine, or sometimes it's some kind of academic sort of analysis of how women's minds work. And you have these things, and they're always relevant to whatever content you're going to get within the next chapter. However, because so much of it is so blatant, I think for some, they're going to feel as though they're being beat over the head with it. I thought it worked because of the fact that it feels very much like it's within a version of our own history where that is how people spoke. And sadly, I actually would go as far as to say you will see some of this rhetoric even in present day. Maybe not so much the lobotomizing. I don't necessarily see that talked about online as if it's a great solution. But I do think some of the ways that they talk about people that have immigrated into this city, or the way that they view people's roles depending on their gender or their place within society, I do think you have a lot of rhetoric that feels similar to things that we have seen before. I still, though, very much have a feeling that for some people, they just want things to be a lot more subtle, and they perhaps want their themes to be up for debate and perhaps need to be interpreted from person to person. I don't think that this book is hiding what its themes are. I don't think it takes all that much effort to see how to interpret it necessarily, although that doesn't mean that I think you're wrong if you end up going about it and feeling differently about the themes. But I don't think it is really abstract and what does this even mean? And it's super artistic. I think it's pretty much like, this is what the themes are, and let me show you all the ways that this society is messed up, to put it in a blunt way. I also think that the ugliness of Sayana as far as her behavior and how she treats other people. I could see some people just having a really difficult time following a character who is as terrible as she can be from time to time. And I also think that there are some individuals where the dynamics between her and Tamil perhaps will also not really be something that they connect to, because perhaps they feel like it doesn't really work, the way that they interact with each other and how they help each other, how they go against each other, and the ways they still come back together. I think for some people, they might see that almost as unrealistic. However, I still highly recommend this book. I think it's amazing if you want an interesting magic system, if you want an academic setting, but within a different setting than what you typically find with academia within stories. I think that's present within this. I think it has complex but easily digestible themes, and I just think that it does so many things so exceptionally. Highly, highly, highly recommend Blood Over Brighthaven. I just want this to have the same level of success as something like Babel, because Babel has done very well for itself, and I think that this is fantastic. If you have any additional things that you want to say, if you want to hype this book up for reasons that I didn't get into, feel free to do that. If there's anything spoiler related to this book that you want to mention, just of course make sure you say spoiler and then enter a bunch of times so that nobody has anything ruined for them. And if you are interested in the book, I'll have it linked in the description bar. Please check this out. It's so good. It's so good. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.